I'm pleased to be joined by Tobin Zoltman, VP of Product Development at Cloudability, along with Ron Fuller, Web Manager, Mentor Graphics, and Kyle Lichtenberg, Solutions Architect with Amazon Web Services. On the agenda, overview of Amazon EC2 Reserved Instance Model, overview of Cloudability's Reserved Instance Planner, and how Mentor Graphics uses Cloudability's RI Planner for cost savings. We will conclude with a Q&A. So without further delay, let me turn it over to Kyle with Amazon Web Services. Take it away, Kyle.
Hey, thanks, Maya. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for making the time to come out here and join us today to talk about reserved instances and learn a little bit more about how you can optimize your infrastructure and your cost around your infrastructure using Amazon Web Services and the solutions provided by our great partner, Cloudability. Before we jump into super deep into the nitty-gritty on the pricing, I wanted to give you guys a quick run-through of how and why companies are choosing Amazon Web Services and how it is that our model can help your business, number one, save money, and number two, improve your flexibility overall. So there are three primary reasons that we see enterprises and companies of any size choosing Amazon Web Services. Number one, to augment their on-premise resources with cloud capacity. So maybe they're overrunning the end of their data center, or they don't have the capabilities built into their infrastructure currently for disaster recovery. They're looking for more flexible test and development environments, or maybe they're just trying to handle some bursty, spiky workload that is not well suited to the private data center type environment. We see a lot of people moving in the cloud direction as a result. Number two, migrating existing apps. So they have existing application workloads that they don't necessarily want to manage on-premise anymore. They're well suited to a cloud environment. They're ready to start moving existing applications in the direction of cloud hosting to get all the benefits that are inherent to those types of systems. And number three, building full new applications. And a lot of our customers even step into the market in this area. They may not have any of number one or number two. They could be a startup that's completely born in the cloud and ready to start using cloud technologies right out the go. But it's not exclusively in any of these three areas. Usually most people have some combination of 1, 2, and 3. The key is that you don't necessarily need to pick one and go with it. You don't have to tear down your whole data center and replace everything. Each of our customers has different needs, and our goal is to enable their success in a way that fits their requirements best. So that's how people are using AWS. Let's talk a little bit about why companies are choosing AWS. So number one, you only pay for infrastructure as you need it. You don't have to pay upfront for your infrastructure. We're going to talk a little bit about reserved instances. Well, actually, we're going to talk a lot about reserved instances today and the pricing model around that, which does come with an upfront cost. But the basic plan, the general package of our platform does not have a standard upfront cost. You can immediately start using our services as soon as you register for an account. You don't have to put in any kind of down payment. With traditional infrastructure, you need to very aggressively guess and estimate how much capacity you'll need over the next 3 to 7 years and pay for most of that on day one. This ties up money that you could be spending on other things, and it's difficult to forecast accurately over such a long period of time. With AWS, you only pay for what you need when you need it. This is a great model, and I can't imagine any business that wouldn't specifically want to only pay for what they use. One of the big benefits here is not having to guess at the long term. So if you want a good laugh, go to your marketing department and ask them which of their online programs this year is going to go viral and it's going to be a huge success. Hopefully you have energetic, outgoing marketing people that will say, all of them, they're all going to be great, but that helps no one plan. And ultimately, you could not plan if you're purchasing physical infrastructure. If you need to burst to an unknown amount, you can't target an unknown amount. The only way to really handle that is by moving to an infrastructure that can burst with you, that can grow with you, that can expand with you as needed. Big benefit of not having the upfront cost and not needing to estimate the types of servers and the size of servers you're going to need upfront is a lower total cost of IT. Since we invest and operate at such a high scale, we pay less per unit than just about anyone in the IT industry. We're born of Amazon.com. The model itself is a business that's based on high volume, low margin. It's part of our DNA. It's what we do. As a result, we can very happily move tons and tons of servers for you, move all of your bits and bytes where they need to be, and pass on all the savings that we can glean by using our automated systems and by operating at the scale that we do. We can pass those savings on to you. I know everyone says that, and it's kind of cliche, but we actually do it. Since our launch in 2006, we've actually dropped prices 38 times. This slide says 34 times, and I don't know if it's a spiteful thing, but every time I update this slide, we drop prices again. So I'm going to continue to do that as much as possible, keep these prices down if it's directly related to my slide work. But chances are it's not. It's mostly because we try to eke every bit of performance we can out of these systems. We try to eke every bit of efficiency we can out of our automation so that we can pass those savings on to you. Nobody wants to pay too much for their infrastructure, and we're happy to let you guys absorb those savings based on the experience that we have working with these systems and optimizing systems in this manner. So number 3, and the slide that I missed the arrow on here, third point here, why people choose AWS, you don't need to guess at capacity. Like I was saying earlier, nobody knows exactly which marketing campaign is going to go viral. It's difficult to predict where your business is going to be in 3 months, 6 months, let alone 3 years, 6 years. Since you don't need to guess at capacity, you can work with a model that is much more elastic. So on the left-hand side, you see a much more traditional self-hosted model with a very rigid growth plan. So if you have the dotted line of predicted demand there, everything between your actual demand, which is the blue line, and the predicted demand that you built for is waste. So if you have servers sitting by that are able to handle that amount of burst workload or that amount of demand from your customers, and you're not using it, that's just wasted money. You're paying for the hardware, you're paying for the electricity, you're paying for it to sit there and be monitored and managed. But if it's not actually being used, there's no value coming out of that. On the right side of that graph, you see if the actual demand bursts over top of your predicted demand and you've only built for your predicted demand, the difference there is customer dissatisfaction. So if you don't have the systems in place to handle the customer load when the customer load is relevant, you're going to have unhappy customers, and unhappy customers are something that none of us want. So the more effective methodology, and the one that cloud computing enables, and specifically AWS's platform enables, is a more elastic methodology. So as you can see on the right side here, the orange graph is the active AWS infrastructure, which rides just a little bit above the actual demand to give you a little room for growth there with your auto scaling or with your manual scaling, however you like to do it. But the key is you can keep on top of the actual demand curve without needing to purchase new equipment and rack new equipment and ship new switches and run more electric circuits. We've got all of that stuff covered for you. You just turn on the pieces that you need when you need those pieces, and we are more than happy to scale with you. So item number 4, increase innovation. So the differentiators in business often come from innovation. They come from experimentation to drive to that innovation point, to find the things that are important enough to your customers that will differentiate you as a business so that your customers will come to you for those new and fun and shiny things. Since there is an elastic nature to our infrastructure, it is very easy to spin up a server for an hour, try something out, and shut it back down. When you do that, you only pay for the hour that you use it. So the cost of experimenting, assuming you clean up after yourself, which personally I'm not fantastic at, and I end up with big bills at the end of the month. However, if you remember to shut off your lab or turn off your experiments and clean things up at the end, it's a very cost-effective platform. Since it's very cost-effective for those things, you can iterate more often, you can experiment more, and you can find the places where you can grow, where you can find new ground, break new ground, where you can differentiate your business without having to worry about spending millions of dollars on building lab technology on-premise. When you have a good idea, try out the good idea. When you're done trying it out, stop paying for it. If it was a great idea, build a new business. If it was a terrible idea, write down the fact that did not work and move on. It's a very cost-effective way to fail quickly if it's a failure, or to succeed and expand greatly at a very low cost if it's not. Another key thing that AWS offers is the opportunity to get rid of undifferentiated heavy lifting. This is the piece of the puzzle that in the data center everyone does the same way. Everyone does power just about the same way. Everyone does cooling just about the same way. Everyone does cabling just about the same way. These are tried and true methodologies, and we actually have the efficiency of experts on our side. We have doctoral level people that are monitoring laminar airflows and managing our cooling and cabling and all of our power systems to make them as efficient as possible. Unless your business is building data centers, chances are you don't have these type of people on staff, and there's no good reason to. You should be focusing on your business and freeing up your teams to focus on their business. So we are more than happy to handle all of the undifferentiated pieces, all of the racks, all the physical servers, managing all the physical storage, all the labor associated with these things, and letting you guys focus on your business, stopping and starting the systems as needed to meet your business needs or your experimentation needs. Whatever it is that's going to drive you forward, we're happy to take everything else. Another great benefit of cloud computing is the ability to go global in minutes. Building a single data center is a huge pain and takes a long time. Building tons of data centers is even more so, and building data centers internationally is just a headache that I don't even have the words to correctly express. But we have 9 regions currently, and as a new AWS customer, you can start up servers right now today in every one of these regions. You can have servers on the East Coast and West Coast of the U.S. You can have them in Europe. You can have them in Japan. You can have them in South America and Australia and all over the world. You can right now start servers without the need to build a data center, to run lines, to lease cable, to get data agreements in place. It's all up. It's all ready to go. It's all there for you. You get all this benefit without having to make really any investments, since there's no upfront cost for the AWS service itself. Now, even with all of these different reasons and these different features on AWS, there's one thing that never changes with cloud computing customers, and really with any customers. Nobody wants to pay more than they have to for their IT infrastructure, and we absolutely agree. As a result, we have lots of different purchase models to fit different business needs. Our free tier service will allow anyone who signed up for AWS access to a certain amount of services that they can go and try out. You can try some of our database services, some of our EC2 services, some of our storage services, all of our queuing services, and our little SNS, or simplification services. You can try all those with a free tier account, which is open to anyone for a year. We also have on-demand, which is our normal standard model, where you can purchase compute by the hour. It's the standard offering. There's a listed price for each of these systems. We're very transparent on what these things cost. You pay for them when they're running. You don't pay for them when they're not. It's a fairly straightforward approach. We also have reserved instances, which if you signed up for this webinar, chances are you're familiar with. And reserved instances make a low one-time payment and receive significant discounts on hourly charges. This is for systems that are commonly being utilized, for systems that are on regularly or on with a predictable pattern. And you can actually make a huge amount of savings that we'll explore just a little bit more in a minute on those types of instances. There's also the spot market, which is bidding on unused capacity. This is a little more complicated because it takes some more work to get the large advantages out of the spot market. But you basically name the price that you want for this instance, and we will give it to you if it's competitive in the market for this unused infrastructure until someone's willing to pay more, at which point we pull that instance away and give it to the person who's willing to pay more. Think of it like a marketplace for instances that are unused. We also have dedicated instances, which are typically used for compliance reasons, but they will allow you, it's a different pricing model, and it'll allow you to have your own dedicated physical infrastructure for your instances if that's something that you require for your systems. So here's a quick look at reserved instance payoff periods. So this is an M2 extra large running Linux in US East over a 3-year period. And you can see here that there are different points when you're going to pass the payoff for these different size instances. So the on-demand is the blue line that's running just complete straight and normal from the bottom left to the top right. That is on all the time. And it's the cost. You can see it there. It's just very predictable, very direct. With the different reserved instance types, you can see on the left side of this graph, there's different price points where this is going to start because there are different price points associated with starting these different sized reserved instances. And then with the exception of the heavy, which is the same price consistently, the other ones grow at a different rate. And you can see there's different crossovers where they pass each other as far as utilization cost effectiveness is concerned. But if you look at the right side, there's just a huge graph, or a huge difference between the on-demand price and even the lightest, the cheapest of the reserved instance costs. There's just a massive, massive difference over a 3-year period. Choosing the right size reserved instance is going to depend on the sweet spot for your workload. So if it's an always-on type workload, you're going to be looking at the heavy utilization, which is the highest starting point, but usually the deepest discount. There's medium utilization for Standard reserved capacity, things that are on most of the time. That's going to have a higher startup price but the lowest hourly rate, assuming that you're going to have that system on for most of the time, but maybe shut it off on the weekends, maybe a few days a month it's not on. Light utilization is for systems that are not on all the time. They're only on regularly, great for disaster recovery workloads, and similar type workloads that are only on periodically or in response to certain events. With these reserved instances, we've actually opened up recently new features to help you get more value out of them and use them more effectively. You can now move them between availability zones within a region, which was previously not possible. You can now split and combine them to optimize your spend if you need some bigger instances or some smaller instances, as long as you stay within the same instance family. You can modify those to meet the needs of your specific infrastructure. And you can also modify the classic/VPC network placement. So you now can move between those two locations, which previously you could not. This is a lot of information about reserved instances, and there's a lot of math that goes into figuring out the best way and most effective way to leverage these reserved instances. And additionally, there's a lot of math that goes into just understanding your infrastructure costs and assigning those things back to the proper departments and understanding how your tagging was leveraged to give you the most effective use of your spend. And we do what we can to give you a strong build, very strong bill at the end of the month that gives you lots of information. And we have some advisory services that can give you suggestions around reserved instances. However, our good friends here at Cloudability, our Amazon partner, they have some technology that can give you even better insight into when you might want to purchase reserved instances and what size reserved instances and how much you might save, as well as some offerings that can help you demystify your bill and make it a little clearer for you. Today's focus is around the reserved instances, but I do have other fantastic offerings that I'd love for you guys to check out. So with that, I'm going to hand you off to Tobin, the VP of Product Development at Cloudability.
Thanks, Kyle. Yeah, everybody, welcome to the webinar. My name is Tobin Zalman. I'm Vice President of Product Development for Cloudability. Today I'm going to be talking through some of the trends that we're seeing with reserved instances amongst our customers, and then also talk through how we've gone about unpackaging the different elements to reserved instances that Kyle just talked through, and represent that in our application to make it really simple and easy for folks to buy reserved instances. And then Ron Fuller from Mentor Graphics is going to be able to talk you through an actual use case of how they're able to do that kind of in practical terms. Before I get going, though, I wanted to take just a second to give a little bit of context to Cloudability and kind of where we are generating some of this data. So if you're not familiar with Cloudability, we help over 8,000 companies manage over $500 million in cloud spending. And through that interaction with a lot of these large enterprise customers, we've really been able to crystallize a lot of best practices around reserved instance purchasing. The application that our customers are using has 5 major feature areas, and it's really the intersection of these feature areas that allows us to get the data to drive a lot of these recommendations. So our platform, if you're not familiar with it, helps you do spend management. So we have budget alerts and daily spending emails that help you kind of keep track of where you're at with your spend. We have cost analytics so that you can dive deeper and understand at a very detailed level how your costs are coming about by looking at cost by tag and cost by usage type as examples. A lot of our users will dig into our usage analytics to understand why costs might be going up. This is really effective to identify underutilized resources and be able to take action on those to reduce costs. Our cost analytics and our usage analytics really form the foundation for our RI planner, our reserved instance planner and analytics, which we'll be stepping through today. And then finally, for large companies, we have a host of enterprise enablement features that really makes it easy to roll this out across an organization and do groupings of accounts, have multiple users in the system, and really customize what each user's experience is. What I want to do, though, is really dig into the science of purchasing reserved instances and look at the types of trends we see of how people are currently buying RIs, and then kind of lay out the methodology that we use for how people should be buying RIs. The biggest observation I think that we've made from looking at all of our customers is that most people are oversimplifying reservation purchasing. And this really manifests itself in two ways. On one side of the coin, we're finding that people are oversimplifying the calculation that they're using in order to purchase an RI. And then on the other side, operationally, people are oversimplifying how they purchase. So, Kyle kind of showed how the break-even points for RIs work. If you're purchasing a lot of RIs, you need some mechanism to calculate that on your own. And there's enough overhead in doing that we've seen a lot of people purchase RIs less frequently, and when they do, kind of just make big kind of blind bets in many cases. And so those two things, oversimplifying the calculations they use and oversimplifying operationally how they purchase them or how frequently they purchase them, yields this sort of an issue where RI purchases become misaligned to your actual needs, and that reduces your ROI. So what I mean by this is if you oversimplify your methodology, you may end up purchasing 50 RIs when in reality all you need are 40. And so that excess RI capacity just whittles away on your ROI. It whittles away on the cost savings that normally you would be able to get from purchasing a reserved instance. The other thing that we're really seeing is that a lot of companies are going all in on one or two very large buys every year. And they're doing this just out of necessity because of the time it takes to figure out exactly what type of reservation you need to purchase. The downside of doing this is that it can result in really large cliffs in reservation levels. And this has two implications. The first is if you're doing a pass over your entire infrastructure once a year, and let's say doing $1 million RI buy, which is going to save you a tremendous amount of money, but essentially what it does is it takes a snapshot of your infrastructure, your entire infrastructure, at that point in time, and it freezes it. Because you're essentially saying, I'm reserving instances for every type of instance that I'm running at the time. And what we found is that utilizing infrastructure on AWS is much more evolutionary than that. So month over month, you may find areas where you could optimize your usage by moving to a smaller instance type, or your needs may change and you need to move to a high memory instance. And while we won't be laying out any strategies today to shorten the time period of an RI, if you move to purchasing RIs more frequently, then essentially over time, every single month you have RIs that will be coming due. And you can make decisions then on should you repurchase the same RI or have your needs of your infrastructure changed. And that could give you an opportunity either to buy different RIs that better align or to change your infrastructure to save money in that respect. The final issue with doing these large, kind of one-time buys is that it's a massive cash flow hit. There are upfront fees associated with RIs, as Kyle explained. Those fees are well worth the money because over the duration of the RI, they pay for themselves. But if you're a smaller organization and you're going to throw down 2 to 3 months worth of your AWS bill in order to lock in a reduced rate, that can be a really massive hit and tough to manage from a cash flow standpoint. So the goal really with all of this is to purchase RIs more frequently and make that entire process simpler. So I want to spend just a couple of minutes here talking through how RIs actually get applied, because this is going to form the foundation of how we process our calculations. So RIs are purchased at an instance type level. So it's basically a combination of three different attributes. Instance type, for example, an M1X large, in a particular availability zone, like US East 1A. And the third thing, which a lot of people don't pay attention to, I don't even have it here listed, but it is relevant, is the operating system. So every recommendation that we make is based on an instance type in a particular AZ running a certain operating system. Reservations are applied each hour. This is really important to understand because this forms the foundation for how you need to look at how RIs are actually applied and how you should purchase them. Essentially what happens is, let's say you have an RI for an M1X large and US East 1A running Linux. At the end of every hour, Amazon is going to cycle through your reservations and cycle through your running instances and see, all right, I have a reservation for an M1X large in US East 1A. Do I have any instances running that meet that criteria? If the answer is yes, then they apply the reservation and it reduces your hourly rate. If the answer is no, then the reservation goes idle. So it's really important to have an understanding of what instances you have running in each AZ every single hour. The next thing here is that an instance is running in a linked account. So if you're using a consolidated billing situation, and let's say you have a master payer account, and you have account A and you have account B, and you have a reservation purchased in account A, but no instance running there that matches it. Well, Amazon will automatically look in account B and see if there are any instances that it could apply to there. And so this gives you the ability to start to get cost savings really across your infrastructure, but you really have to pay attention to where your reservations are purchased and where your instances are running. The key thing to note with this is even though cost savings will transfer from account A to account B, capacity will not. So when you purchase a reservation, not only are you getting a discounted hourly rate, but that is essentially putting you at the front of the line with Amazon to ensure that if you need to spin up an instance, if you have a reservation for it, they'll make sure that that capacity is there for you when you launch the instance. So that's a little bit about how reservations are applied. Let's talk briefly about modifying reserved instances. And Kyle talked to this point a little bit, where Amazon is now allowing companies to apply to transfer a reservation from one availability zone to another. In addition to transferring from one AZ to another, you can now also trade in existing RIs for a different size in the same family. So what this means is if you have an M1 large, you could convert that to multiple M1 smalls. So I won't spend a ton of time getting into this, but basically Amazon has laid out a normalization scheme where an M1 small is worth 1 point, an M1 large is worth 4 points, so you could convert one M1 large to 4 M1 smalls as an example. The things to consider with this, though, is that transfers don't happen automatically. You have to fill out a form with AWS in order for this to happen, and transfers are not guaranteed. They're based on available capacity in the availability zone that you want to transfer to. So these are really effective tools at tweaking your reserved instance alignments to your infrastructure over time. But you really need kind of a couple of things. One, you need the tools to figure out where you need to make these adjustments. And you need to make sure that Amazon has the capacity to actually accept that transfer once you do it. And generally speaking, the capacity side of things is not an issue. Amazon is really solid when it comes to building out capacity across availability zones. So let's go through some math here I'm going to break down a simplified example of how you would go about calculating reserved instance needs. And the reason I'm going to expose the math on this a little bit is because it's really relevant to understand how this works to figure out how many instances you should be purchasing. So here's a screenshot of a report in our application that identifies various instances and shows their utilization rate. In other words, this is how many hours, in this case in a month, that instance is in a running state. So we look at these and it's a no-brainer. These are all running 94% of the time. So we should buy heavies for all of these. That makes perfect sense. The challenge is when you look at the lower end of the usage range. Let's say we have 3 instances that are running 30% of the time. And the break-even point for a light reservation, let's say, is 25%. So should we buy 3 light reservations because they're all running at least 30% of the time, so we would be above that break-even point? Well, we actually don't know. Because what we don't know is if those instances are running at the same time. Remember, Amazon applies reservations hourly. So what we have to look at is how many instances are running every hour of the day. And so let's take our 3 instances running 30% of the time. Hypothetically, if you had one instance that was running the first week of the month, the next instance was running the second week, and the third instance was running the third week of the month, you wouldn't need to buy one light. Because if you did that, you would only have one reservation applied at a time, and the other 2 reservations would really go to waste. Instead, we could look at their usage in a consolidated fashion, and in that case, you should buy a heavy reservation. They're being used 90% of the time, so you could buy a heavy RI. The resulting, the difference in savings from those approaches is with a heavy RI used 90% of the time, you're probably going to save about 50%. If you bought the 3 lights, right off the bat, a light is going to save you about 20 to 30%, but you have 2 that are idle, so you would probably only save about 10%. So there's a 40% net savings difference by looking at things from an hourly standpoint. So let me dig into a really simplified example here of how you would go about kind of breaking this apart. So this is a oversimplified example of a 10-hour month. So in this 10-hour month, we are essentially looking at how many instances are running every single hour of the month. So in hour 1, you have 4, in hour 2, you have 6, etc. And what we do behind the scenes at Cloudability is we break this down into a frequency distribution and show how many instances we're actually running every single hour of the month. And from that, we cycle through based on the break-even points for lights, mediums, and heavies. And so we will say 4 instances we're running, let's say 70%, or 4 instances we're running 70% of the month, which is above the break-even point for a heavy. 5 instances we're running at least 50%, which is above the break-even for a medium. And 4 we're running 40, which is above the break-even point for a light. Looks like the text on the slide kind of got overlapped here, but you can kind of see how this works. So let's look at the tool quickly, and we can actually see kind of how we break this out. So this is our reserved instance planning tool, and you can see that we're essentially identifying every single instance availability zone OS type. And then if we drill into one of these, then we can identify how many current RIs we have and how many we ultimately need. And so we display this as a histogram. And so you can see this bar chart at the top that is kind of multicolored. What this bar chart is actually showing is how many instances are running every single hour of the reporting period. And if we kind of break this down, we then show how many of those how many instances per hour we're running above, let's say 60% of the time, which would be the break even for a heavy, hypothetically. But we do the calculation based on the exact break even point for that instance type and that AZ running that operating system. So we'll cycle through and identify how many heavies you should purchase and then how many mediums you should purchase. You can see that band near the top indicating mediums. And then finally, we identify lights that you would purchase for the peaks of your usage. So this is really an effective method if you're using auto-scaling to kind of break all of that down. Finally, we present a host of financial numbers here that make it really easy to understand what your cost savings would be, how much your upfront costs would be, your savings rate, your break-even points, and that works really well to pass that off to a finance group, to a CFO essentially, to get approval to do the purchase. So to kind of sum up, our recommendations for purchasing reserved instances: base your purchase decisions on hourly instance counts, not based on aggregated data. That gives you the ability to align the example I gave where you could buy one heavy instead of 3 lights. Make frequent reservation purchases to really help maximize your cost efficiency and give you more levers to pull over time so that every month or 2 months you can be realigning expiring RIs to your infrastructure. Don't over-purchase heavies. Really leverage lights and mediums to cover the volatility in your usage, especially if you have auto-scaling. And if capacity reservations are important to you, utilize light reservations to hold capacity in a different availability zone. So this helps if there's a run on demand, let's say in US East, and you had a few light reservations in US West, you would be at the front of the line to get your instances spun up in that other availability zone. So in a nutshell, that's how we go about calculating RIs. We have a 14-day trial of Cloudability available. Feel free to go on, try that out. Here's my contact information if you have additional questions. I'll hand it over now to Ron Fuller from Mentor Graphics to give his take, I guess, on how they actually go about implementing reserved instance purchases at his company.
All right, thanks, Tobin. Yeah, maybe just to give a setup of how Mentor uses Amazon infrastructure and how we sort of context for the entire discussion. Just give you an idea of what we do, how the projects that we launch. Right now we have multiple properties that we support. We have multiple tools and applications, probably typical to some of the environments that you might have. And right now our entire production site is on Amazon Web Infrastructure. So this presents a number of challenges and problems of building out all these platforms for this level of service. So if you take a look at what we've done, you can see that we're really, the usage of our applications spans a number of regions across the Amazon Web Services region map. So we have our corporate-facing website, we have the support site, we have our e-commerce store, and then we have an evaluation platform that's spread out across multiple regions. We have multiple zones, lots of things going on, and trying to really manage the cost and as the complexity grows, trying to leverage a lot of these tools like Cloudability to see that we're successful in these deployments. So one of the things we noticed as we started to grow our infrastructure, as we started to add projects, add properties, the number of running instances that we started to spin up on a monthly basis just becomes pretty complex. So the question is how much E is in EC2 that you're using? And if you look at this line, yeah, it's easy to manage sort of the stuff that you know about that's stable, that's sort of always on. But it's the fluctuation in the line that makes things challenging as you use auto-scaling, as you build up, test environments that are not always on, as you build DR plans where you've got things in a pilot light strategy. You have all these sort of instances that you're trying to look at and go, are these candidates possibly to help me with my spend? So in addition to the instance that are running, you have the scale that happens. And so, early on when we sort of did a lift and shift where we took our traditional sort of, infrastructure that was our web property, moved it from a hosting facility, put it on Amazon, pretty basic, architecture, single account, single region, multiple AZs. And then as we started to really leverage the cloud to spin up more applications, spin more projects, the complexity grew. And so, and in fact, so one of the things we started doing was we have multiple accounts and we have consolidated billing. And so we're trying to spread projects across these accounts to try and manage the spend, manage the infrastructure, manage the security. We looked at, and of course, we're running now multiple regions and again, multiple availability zones. This complexity really is not only in the application space to manage it, but from a cost standpoint to understand, okay, can I buy a reserved instance in this particular AZ, in this account, and what if another account needs to use this, or I decide that I made the wrong decision, and so can I roll that up? So all these sort of complexities start kind of bubbling in. And of course, the increase, as you look at your program, I look at my program dollars and I look from, the last 3 years, initially when you just move your infrastructure over, our spend compared to other things that we're doing, from product licenses to agency development to services that we purchase in addition to the infrastructure, it wasn't a significant portion. But as applications, as projects, as we've deployed more to the cloud, our cloud spend has definitely increased. And so it's an opportunity cost for us. So the more we spend on cloud, obviously the less we're not doing in some of the other spaces. So we really took a look at this and said, how are we going to continually leverage the price reductions that Kyle talked about at Amazon, and how we're going to take advantage of RI spending. So one of the things we found was that as we use the cloud in multiple environments and multiple applications and expand our architecture, the insight into where we would spend our eyes would decrease with things like test environments. So you're going to run your test environment as a 2-week QA. Is it going to be 24/7? Is it going to be 12/5 just on during the day? And then as you scale out your web servers and you start doing on-demand and things like that, how often are you scaling out? How often is that traffic burst? The project that you're working on, how many times are you spinning up instances that you may actually be able to use, light reservation or even medium, but just trying to make that decision and sort of pull the trigger on that became fairly complex. And so we really just stayed away from it. We just kind of, what Tobin was talking about, we just kind of did the oversimplification model. It's like, okay, we know that the production environment is 24/7. We'll pick those instances, but the stuff that's sort of, dynamic and fluctuating, it just become more of a challenge. So if you look at, why do we use reserved instances, we're really about a 44% savings over our on-demand. Now, that savings number gets increased when the more efficient you utilize your RI purchases. Because like Tobin would say, sort of the all-in, we manage our budgets on a quarterly basis. We look at what our spend is. We forecast. We're like, let's pull the trigger on a big RI spend and do a whole calculation on that. And today we're only using the 1 year, so I don't have the visibility to go beyond 3 years right now. I don't know what my project's going to be doing, my infrastructure, and so, but we're very happy with that level of savings. And of course, the reserve portion, the ability to auto scale on a 1-by-1. If your system goes down, you need to self-heal. It's really nice to know that you have a very good chance that when you actually request another instance, it's going to be there for you. or the sort of continuous deployment model. You shut down a stack, you bring up another one, that you'd actually have the reserved. So if you look at some of the architectures that, typical, traditional, VPC, multiple instances, you got various security groups, you got internet gateways, you got some connection maybe back to your corporate network, and you start looking at some of this stuff and some auto scales, you got some worker threads, and some of this stuff is sort of more fixed in nature. And so you identify those candidates and you start looking at usage. This is actually, a fairly intense operation where you're looking at all your architectures, you're trying to manage that across accounts, and it just becomes a challenge, right? So then as your architecture grows, you start spinning this out, you get more different types of capabilities. You have search, you have databases involved, you've got web server stacks, you've got application tiers, you've got test instances. And so you start even trying again then, like, let's look at the inside of which things I can pull the trigger on RIs. And so what we did is we built this spreadsheet, and we took and set up all these columns, and we tagged it with projects, and we looked at our architectures, and we launched into each console. We spun up and looked at the instance types. We pulled the pricing down from Amazon, and we built all these columns, and then we looked at the price difference between buying heavies and buying lights and buying on-demand pricing. And it was just this time-consuming effort where we're just trying to figure out in this quarter, let's pull the trigger on these projects. And really, again, like I said, because we didn't really have that great insight on the whole light medium thing, it was just limited to heavy. And then as Amazon would reduce prices and we do the next quarter, we're look at heavy spends, just trying to update the spreadsheet and keep it in sync was a huge challenge. So what we ended up doing was using the Cloudability RI planning tool, and just like Tobin talked about. And so what it does with our multiple accounts, we have the consolidated billing, we have the different architectures across these accounts. It really lets us visualize everything in one place, which is no more logging into the console and trying to pull every account and so on. It really gave us a good insight, and we could see where things were missing. And then we could look and see, there's really a good chance that we can actually spend light and medium utilization on the stuff that's the on-demand, the auto-scale, some of our applications that are just spinning up in a certain time, the test environments. So that really is another potential for huge cost savings for us. And then I think one of the really big things is as you manage your quarterly spend, and for us at least, and we're trying to indicate to our finance team why we would go spend a big dollar amount in a particular month or quarter, really giving them the insight and the reporting that says, hey, this is what we're saving compared to just a monthly flat line, consistent on-demand price is super valuable to us. And then what the tool does is it really, there's no more spreadsheet management. It's accurate, and it allows us to really make confident spend choices and save probably days of time in administration and give us insight that we really didn't have before. So that's how Mentor Graphics uses RIs and Cloudability's RI tool.
Thank you very much, Ron, and thank you all for demonstrating how to make smarter EC2 reserved instance purchases with Cloudability. Let's open it up for a Q&A. I already see quite a few questions. We have a very engaged crowd. So I'm going to start with a question for Kyle. Can an existing on-demand instance be converted to reserved with no downtime?
Sure. So this is actually something that confused me a bit when I started working with reserved instances as well. A reserved instance isn't tied to a specific instance. It is think of it like a coupon for an instance type in an instance area. So there actually is no conversion of that instance from an on-demand to a reserved instance. It's just a question of whether or not that coupon can be opportunistically applied to that instance to give you the discount for the reserved instance.
Thank you very much. One more question to you. Can you set up a standard schedule to shut off and then restart an instance? Say shut off at 8 p.m. and restart at 7 a.m.
Sure, I can take that one as well. So there's no clear-cut way to do this through the console to say stop at this time and start at that time. However, using our auto-scaling tools, you can set a schedule for auto-scaling that says to scale this instance group down to 0 servers at this point and scale it back up to X number of servers at this point, which effectively can give you the turning off, turning on effect. But through the console, there's no clear-cut way to do it. Additionally, there's lots of other scheduling tools that you can find that will allow this to happen. Very simply, defining schedules and calling the API commands remotely can do this as well. And you can schedule those types of jobs from your existing instances and from remote infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Kyle. My next question is for Tobin. Does cost savings report calculate with info on change usage?
So it does, yeah. The way that we handle that is when we're laying out what sort of reserved instance you should purchase, that's based on actual usage, and that's live for us. We pull that data from AWS every single hour, and so our recommendations use basically up to 90 days worth of data and can be as recent as an hour old. So as your usage changes, then that we would reflect that in the break-even points that we're showing, and that could either go up or down, based on your actual usage level.
Thank you very much. If we purchase an RI overnight, do we get charged for that time? Kyle?
Sorry, I was on mute there. So when you purchase the RI, you are charged at the end of the month for that startup cost, and you're only charged for the time that the instance is running, with the exception of the high usage RI, which is charged as though it's running all the time. So if you purchased a high utilization RI and did not immediately start a system or already have a system that was running based on that RI type, you would have a cost for that overnight period. But if you already had a system in place, you would start getting a discount for that immediately.
So I'm going to point that next question to you. If I purchase an RI in a master pair account, will it apply to a linked account?
The cost savings will. The capacity, the capacity assurance will not. So if you buy a heavy, let's say, and you're running an instance that meets that criteria in a child or a linked account, it would inherit the reduced hourly rate. But if the data center was at capacity and you went to turn on an instance that met that criteria in a linked account, the capacity assurance would not be in the linked account. It's only in the account where you purchased the reservation.
Thank you. So one more question. When reserved instances go down in price, will only the new reserved instances be at that new price?
Yeah, I can answer that as well. Yes. So when you purchase a reserved instance, you're essentially entering into an agreement with Amazon for a fixed price for a set term, 12 or 36 months. So unlike on demand where, whatever Amazon's price is at that particular moment is what you're charged, you're basically agreeing to pay a significantly reduced rate, but a fixed rate for that, for the duration of the term.
Thank you. This question could be to either one of you guys. How do I know what instance is using the RI?
I can take that one again. This is Tobin from Cloudability. So this is, we get this question a lot, and there's not a really clean answer to it. Bear in mind that when you're buying a reservation, you're not purchasing that for a specific instance. You are purchasing it for a type of instance in a certain availability zone with a particular OS. So any instance that is running in that availability zone that meets the criteria could have it applied. So that's an area that a lot of people kind of struggle with when they're first starting to look at RIs. In terms of seeing which instance a reservation was applied to, Amazon does give visibility in the programmatic billing access files where they can identify for each instance if a reservation was applied at that time, during a particular hour or not. What it doesn't do is identify the reservation ID to let you know which specific reservation was applied. Typically, that's not a big deal unless you have purchased a large number of separate reservations for an instance type and a particular AZ and have purchased those at different rates, and you want to parse out the difference in rates. But that's a fairly specific edge case from what I've seen in terms of what people care about.
Kyle, I would like to point the next question to you. Are reservations applied only if an exact instance type match is found, or can a reservation be applied to a lesser, cheaper instance type?
Sure. So reservations are only applied to an exact instance type, and if that instance type is not found, it is not applied. To be able to apply them to lesser instance types, you'd need to go through the process of breaking the larger instance into the smaller instance reservations, which takes going online and using the forms to modify those. And that's really where such a high value comes from in our partnership with Cloudability, to help you identify the scenarios where you need bigger, smaller, more or less, and to get you the right number and the right shape and size of your reserved instances.
Tobin, this will be our last question due to time constraints. Does Cloudability offer consulting and implementation services on optimal use of RIs and future growth?
We do for our customers, absolutely. We don't have paid consulting, but if you're a customer of ours, we have a customer success group who will help you figure those sorts of things out, identify best practices, and identify a growth plan for you, absolutely.
Thank you very much for taking all these questions. We cannot answer all the questions now, but Cloudability will reach out to you to answer your unanswered